Hey, this is Tom, and today I have another fun episode where I'm going to show you how to take some of your sculpting skills and apply them in a different way. This time I'm going to take one of my Heroquest Gargoyles from the original box set and fix it up because it's all broken to pieces. So back in 1990, Heroquest came out to the United States, and I probably ended up playing it probably by 91 or 92 when the Barbarian Quest pack was coming out. And that, much like other people in my generation, is pretty much the main reason that I got into miniatures. I've loved the game, and over the past year I went ahead and painted all the figures. All I have to do left to do is paint my gargoyle and the heroes, but can't paint the gargoyle until I fix them. So let me show you how I fix my Heroquest Gargoyle and maybe tune it up a little more. And be sure to stick around till the very end where I'll have a surprise reveal. Here is my Heroquest Gargoyle. I'm not sure what exactly happened or how he broke over time. Maybe somebody stepped on him or just got damaged from use over the years. But as you can see, there's no whip. It's lost to the sands of time. And got the wings here. They're popped off. Nothing's glued together. I think it was all push to fit is how I had these assembled back in the day. But the wings snapped apart as well. So let's go ahead and get this guy repaired. But in the meantime, I'm going to do some modifications just to make this one look a little bit more unique, so I'm not just putting together another Heroquest Gargoyle. Of course, the first thing you have to do with any miniature is remove the mold lines. On these figures, they're very simple pieces. In this case, it's multi-part, but it's got a very flat plane to it overall, so it's very easy to locate and clean these up. I usually use an X-Acto blade or my scalpel for most of it just to trim some off and to scrape. You can use a file too to get in those hard to reach places, but I find that the scalpels tend to leave a cleaner, smoother surface, especially on these plastic models. So that's what I stick with unless there's a really tough area I just can't get into. Now it's time to start prepping the right hand for the replacement weapon. There was some glue on here that I had to clean off, as well as drill a little primer hole to receive the brass wire that I was going to be using to help seat the new weapon, make sure it wouldn't come off. I have various thicknesses of brass rods that I use for all my sculpting and converting work. They complement each other well, so I know the right drill bit size to go with the right rod. I don't remember the specific bit size here, but the brass rod is going to be 3/64 or 1.2 millimeters. I think that's about the thickest that I typically use and have. This is a larger figure with a very large hand, so it's always good to use those large, robust materials whenever you can, just so that you have more to work with. This must be the next day because my finger isn't bleeding anymore. Always be careful when you're drilling. Very easy to let it slip right into your finger. Anyway, so here is that 1.2 millimeter, 3/64 inch brass rod. I went ahead and cut, I don't even know if I cut it down. I think I just grabbed a giant length because I wasn't sure how much I was going to need, and I didn't want it to end up being too short. So here I'm just placing it in the primer hole that I created, and I think I had a picture up of the gargoyle because I wanted the kind of form and movement of the whip to be pretty similar. You know, it might be a little bit different, but got a couple different pliers I'm using here. I've got a small flat nose, needle nose type plier, and then I also have this rounded one, which is great for bending curves and twists and stuff. So I went ahead and just used some regular snips to cut it down. So I felt like I had a pretty good idea of what the size would need to be, and then that would allow me a little more working room. So just keep bending that, twisting it until I get it into shape. Now we get to the fun part. I've seen a lot of paintings of the Heroquest Gargoyle over the years where they paint him up as a full flesh and blood, maybe more like some sort of red corn demon. But the Heroquest art itself, on the main Zargon dungeon screen, shows it more of like a stone gargoyle with red eyes, like the stone statue has come to life, and I really like the look and the idea of that. So what I decided to do for this gargoyle is go ahead and add a lot of like chips and cracks and damage like that, just to show that it has been worn over time and from, you know, movement of coming alive. To do that, I used my scalpel and X-Acto blade primarily to cut a lot of nice straight lines, just going in at it from 2 different angles to create these deep chips. And then from time to time I have a triangular file that I like to run across, and that's a nice way to just make some slight little gouges into places and ensure they're very straight. I carried this across the whole figure, lots on the body, but I also put some very prominent cracks on the wings, and as you already saw, a lot on the face and head. This is one of my favorite types of things to do whenever I'm modeling. I love doing battle damage and other little elements like that. It turns a very plain vanilla piece into something that's a little more unique and stands apart. I love doing it on Space Marines because, you know, they all look the same, you know, very plain and smooth armor. And so if you add different sort of like blasts and cracks and things like that, it can really make them set apart and tells a little story of, you know, what kind of battles they were in or how much fire they were taking. So it's just one of my favorite things to do when I'm modeling. Before I add the brass wire in for the whip to the miniature, I realized that the tip was looking really blunted, so I just wanted to file that down and make it a little bit more of a nice, smooth end point. I bet you were getting worried that I wasn't going to use any green stuff in this video. Well, in this specific case, I'm actually using it a little bit differently. I'm not using it for sculpting. This is a great way to help glue and bond something, especially if there's a little bit of gap or wiggle room like there was with this wire. So what you do is you mix up your green stuff, you put a little glue on one side of where you're going, and then you add a little glue on the other side, but you have green stuff sandwiched in between. And that super glue plus green stuff will bond super strong, and it fills in all the gaps. When I first put this wire in, I thought maybe it was going to be thick enough to work as the whip, but as I looked at it further, I thought it needs a little more. It'd be okay if it was thinner like that at the end, but at the base it just looked too weak and flimsy. So I started to add on some putty. Now I want to point out that before I did this, I made sure to let the wire that was glued in with the green stuff, that was completely cured. I left it for an entire day before I went back in there to sculpt more, because otherwise I would have probably rocked it out of place and destabilized the base of the whip. I really think this worked out well. I just added some putty, kind of wrapped it around, made it as thickest at the base where the hand is holding it, and slowly started to taper off the material as it went up. I like to use my fingers actually more than tools, especially when I'm trying to make smooth areas on large forms. When you use small tools, you can tend to get a lot of marks and things like that show up. But when you're using your fingers, you know, it's much larger, and you can pinch and grab and do other things that you can't do with a single tool. I was able to get the whip pretty smooth, rounded, and consistent throughout, but I did end up having to go back and do just a little bit of filing at the very end after I let it cure. Speaking of which, I should point out, do not put this in a putty oven or warming device to help cure your putty faster. This is a plastic miniature. If you do that, apply it to any significant amount of heat to speed up the curing time in a meaningful way, you will melt your miniature. So you can, I guess, if you really needed some help, what you could do is you could put a lamp near it or over it with an incandescent light bulb, and that would help warm the air around it, but it wouldn't significantly raise the temperature. That can be useful, but normally with doing this sort of work, putty work and sculpting, I would actually put this in a putty oven and let it cook, and I could, have whatever work I had done set up in a relatively short amount of time. Right now I'm adding on a little grip. I didn't want it to look like there was just a leather whip coming straight out of his hand. I wanted to make it look like there was more of an interesting handle. And actually this part I didn't let Kieran set up first. I did that for the wire to make sure it's set, but when I was doing this handle part, I decided I didn't want to wait, so I went ahead and just started sculpting it right away. And if you're very careful and mix up a fresh batch of putty, so that it's softer, you can get away with that. And you just had to I had to do a little bit of cleanup on the whip part for the handle, but I think it turned out very well. And once again, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel on this miniature, so I did not want to wait to let everything cure. I wanted to put 2 little studs onto the handle portion, just to, again, have it not look so plain. So I made two balls of putty that were roughly the same size, and then I have these tools that I made. They're just brass rods that I kind of bored out, hollowed to make the ridges very thin and a little bit sharp. And I take those and I just press it right on the dot of putty. Now normally it's a little easier to do that when your surface that they're on is cured, but once again, I just decided I didn't want to wait. This is just a conversion, so I decided that I would be willing to clean it up a little bit. And with that, all that's left is to glue the miniature together. I went ahead and was able to use some plastic glue, cement glue, on that initial wing. Unfortunately, this other part, because of how it broke, it wouldn't make well enough contact against the main miniature, so I had to employ that same trick as before. I wiped off all the cement, put a little super glue, got a bit of putty to make sure to help fill that gap, put super glue on the other side, and press it together. And it is super, super strong, very well bonded. I don't think it's ever going to come apart. And then do the same for the head. A little bit of super glue, a little bit of green stuff, and that's it. So here it is. You stay till the end, get to see the final converted Heroquest Gargoyle. But I have a funny story to share with you. So as I mentioned, I had 2 of these. I had my original set, and then a buddy of mine who didn't care about Heroquest anymore when we were kids sold me his. So I ended up with 2 copies of Heroquest, everything. But I had this one broken one, which I believe came from his set, and then another one that was repaired. Well, while I was filming this, I was virtually complete with everything. I went ahead, I was looking around in some of my old miniature boxes, and what do you know? I found my original premium, perfect condition Heroquest Gargoyle. Although, look at that, you can see this wing's already straining a little bit, so you need to be a little careful. But I guess it goes to show that no matter what, even if think you've lost your prized Heroquest miniature, you got to keep sculpting.